It didn't fall in a single day. It didn't collapse in a blaze of glory. And it didn't fall the way most people imagine. The Roman Empire once, the mightiest force the world had ever seen, didn't go out with a bang, but with a slow, strange unraveling, like a marble statue left in the rain, eroding one crack at a time. What's most shocking? The fall of Rome wasn't inevitable. It happened in ways no one expected, and through decisions no one thought would matter. This is the story of how the empire that ruled 3 continents for centuries crumbled in 5 surprising steps. Soldiers returning from war in the East brought back more than trophies. They brought death. And it begins with a plague. Something else entirely, but it tore through the population. In cities, bodies piled up in the streets. Entire villages vanished. By some estimates, 5 million people died, including Marcus Aurelius himself. Not the sword, not the barbarian, but something far more insidious. In the year 165 AD, under the reign of Marcus Aurelius, and one of Rome's most revered emperors, a mysterious illness swept through the empire, the Antonine Plague. No one knows exactly what it was. Smallpox, measles. In walked Diocletian, a clever administrator with one clear goal: control. A massive chunk of the empire's workforce and military-aged men was simply gone. The Eastern and Western Roman empires, each with their own emperor, capitals, and armies. It was called a tetrarchia system, where 4 rulers governed together in harmony. Rome was no longer one empire, it was 2 empires pretending to be one. Over time, the East, richer and more stable, looked down on the struggling West. When trouble came, the East didn't always help. The West would find itself alone. But by the late 300s, the floodgates opened to a group the Romans called barbarians. Recruitment faltered. Trade slowed. Crops failed. The gears of empire ground slower, but the real damage wasn't just death. They weren't invaders, they were refugees. Fleeing the terrifying advance of the Huns in the east, they sought shelter within the empire's borders. It was what died with them. Taxpayers, farmers, soldiers, merchants. They extorted them, sold them dog meat at outrageous prices, took their children as slaves. The Goths, humiliated and starving, rose in revolt. Rome recovered in name, but the machine had seized. The first crack had formed, and then came a choice seemingly wise, ultimately fatal. The year was 284 AD. The empire was in chaos. Generals were rising and falling like clockwork. Emperors murdered by their own guards. He knew one man couldn't manage an empire stretching from Britain to Syria, so he split it in 2. Entire units of the Roman army became filled with men who, just a generation before, had been Rome's enemies. On paper, this made sense. Constantine the Great had made it legal. Theodosius made it mandatory. The temples of Jupiter and Mars were closed. The old gods were banished. The Roman Empire had suffered defeats before. But this was different. Now, those who clung to the old ways were branded pagans. Instead of fighting external threats, Rome was too often fighting itself. Civil wars broke out, not over land, but over theology. Doctrinal disputes turned bloody. Bishops fought bishops. Heretics were executed. But harmony doesn't last long in politics. The division bred rivalry, suspicion, competing priorities. The fracture widened and it never healed. The third step, a betrayal from within. Rome had always welcomed outsiders. It wasn't just Latin and Roman blood that built the empire. It was Gauls, Greeks, Egyptians, Iberians. Even the people of China heard whispers that the world had ended. Once a mercenary in Rome said this. Now its conqueror, chief among them, the Goths. In 376 AD, tens of thousands of Gothic families arrived at the Danube River, begging to cross into Roman territory. Rome said yes, and then Rome betrayed them. The officials tasked with settling the Goths treated them like dirt. 2 years later, at the Battle of Adrianople, They crushed a Roman army and killed Emperor Val. The enemy wasn't across the border anymore. They were inside. The Western Emperor Romulus, Augustulus, a teenage puppet, was deposed by a Germanic general named No grand battle, no apocalyptic fire. Rome never fully expelled them. In fact, over time, it started hiring them. Goths, Vandals, Huns, Roman generals began recruiting them as mercenaries. Loyalty could be bought for a while, but eventually it turned on them. The fourth step was greed. But not just economic, it was spiritual. Not from one single villain, but from 5 quiet, shocking steps. By the 4th century, the empire had a new official religion, Christianity. What began as a persecuted faith now became the faith of emperors. It was a transformation like no other, but it came at a cost. Rome was once united by patriotism, civic duty, and tradition. The unity of Rome fractured under the weight of religious intolerance. And then came step 5, the one everyone remembers but few understand. In the year 14 AD, the impossible happened. Rome, the eternal city, was sacked, not by Persians, not by Egyptians, not by Carthaginians, but by the Visigoths, led by a man named Ali. The shock was global. Rome had not been taken in 800 years. But here's what's surprising. The empire didn't fall that day. It limped on for a decade. In fact, when Rome fell for real, most people barely noticed. It was 476, just a letter sent to Constantinople. We don't need an emperor here anymore. And that was it. The Western Roman Empire was gone. The Eastern Empire was... So, how did it happen? Not through one epic war, a deadly plague that killed the soul of the empire, a decision to divide what was once whole, a betrayal that turned refugees into enemies, a spiritual revolution that shattered unity, and a slow death, so quiet that the world barely noticed it was over. The fall of Rome is not just a tale of lost cities and ancient ruins. It's a mirror, a warning that even the greatest powers don't fall overnight. They fall piece by piece, when no one's paying attention. And that's what makes history worth remembering. Because someday, someone may look back and ask how we fell. Ask Chat